We've got Jennifer from here in Austin.
Hello.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. I have two questions, and the first one is, it seems like a lot of times when you talk to atheists, they start from the premise that personal experience has been established to be unreliable. And but we rely on personal experience all the time. Like in courtrooms, you know, the value of eyewitness testimony, that's the fundamental evidence. You know, the jury can take it and believe it or not believe it, but the value of personal testimony, not hearsay, what someone else has told you has been their experience, but what you experienced yourself, the value of putting it forward is still considered primary, and it's a foundational principle of the U.S. And we also rely on personal experience all the time. Like if you're going to do something like climb the Himalayas and you've never done it, you read about people who have done that before, and they say, you know, at whatever altitude I experienced this. You don't know, but you believe them. You take precautions, or you prepare based on what they experience. And so it seems like the value of personal experience has not been proven to be unreliable. And then the second question is that it seems like something can be understood or it can't. It's understandable or it's not. And like Catholics start from the premise that the nature of reality can't be understood. It's not understandable. And atheists seem to start from the premise that you know, reality is a process that could be understood. But if it could, why don't we understand any more than we did like 2,000 years ago? We have theory, you know, the theory of the Big Bang, but when you look at what complexity theorists say, they say that there's still a lot of leaps that have to be made in thinking to make the concept work. You know, like it's not established. We still don't fully understand it. And so if the nature of reality is understandable, why don't we understand more about it today than we did, say, 2,000 years ago?
Well, let's take that one at a time. I probably should have interrupted you before going on to the second one.
Those are two big questions, yeah.
Personal experience. Is it reliable?
Well, you have to realize it's not binary. It's not like all personal experience is reliable or no personal experience is reliable. It's not like you're choosing to, you know, deny all experience or accept all experience. That's not how it works. Personal experience has a certain probability of being reliable, and what you're looking at is when the particular claim the person is making is going to have an intrinsic prior probability. So if they're saying they, you know, aliens abducted them, or they're saying they, you know, they saw a horde of demons attack them in their room or something like that, we know from past experience that that usually turns out to be hallucinatory or not true. And so for a personal experience to overcome that, we need a lot more evidence than that. We need superbly good personal experience, or we need a lot of it from a lot of different sources, a lot of different witnesses, or we need physical evidence.
And you're talking about like standards of evidence that professional historians would take into account.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. This is what I do in the book. It's Bayesian reasoning, where you have to weigh the different possibilities. So certain kinds of testimonies are unreliable, or obviously unreliable, because they make improbable claims. And so for those claims to be upheld, you need more than just someone claiming it. That's why
I mean, like, what about, you know, people who wrote Gospels who said, you know, they wrote it after they say Jesus died, and they say, you know, they witnessed it.
But they don't.
They were closer in time.
Yeah, none of the Gospels were written by anyone who says they foresaw any of the stuff they wrote down. In fact, they don't even tell us who they are or how they know anything that they haven't. They don't tell us their sources. They don't tell us their methods, which is very weird.
Written, I mean, 50 years in the big scheme of things is not that much time. And so,
actually, it is.
You know, if it was,
I made this point.
I just want to say I'm so excited to get this call with Richard.
I made this point.
It's a lot less than
I made this point in my speech yesterday.
1,550 years.
Well, let's talk about Roswell, New Mexico. In 1947, this Air Force officer found some sticks and tinfoil in the desert, and he claimed it was debris from a flying saucer. Within just 30 to 40 years, and this is in the 20th century with universal literacy, newspapers, photographs, the whole deal, within just 30 to 40 years, an entire legend had built up about the government discovering an entire intact flying saucer that they recovered alien bodies from and performed autopsies on. That's just 30 to 40 years. So it's the exact same timeline that we're looking at with the Gospels. Legends can spring up really fast.
But it's starting from not an eyewitness account. It's starting
Well,
from
yeah, it
someone
is actually.
making...
But
No, he's saying he found something.
Yeah.
Well, from what you said, he's saying he found something.
Yeah,
He
it was
didn't say he
published in the
saw
newspaper.
The ship crash.
Yeah, it was in the
didn't-
newspaper with photographs of the debris that he found
But
from
you
1947.
didn't say he saw the. But you didn't say he said he saw the ship found. I mean,
No,
crash.
that was what people were telling just 30 to 40 years later. And so when we look at the Gospels, we don't know where these people are getting their stories. They're not eyewitnesses themselves. They don't claim to know any eyewitnesses. They don't even tell us what their sources are.
Why are they written as a description? I mean, it's written as an eyewitness description.
It actually isn't.
It's like Jesus.
No.
It's like, Jesus was on the cross, then he asked for a drink
Oh,
of
no,
water.
no. Oh, you know what? I highly recommend then you can do some more research on this. For example, the crucifixion account is almost entirely based on clips from the Psalms. They just took passages. If I had time, I could dig out an example from my book.
But the language.
No,
is
actually,
like
the language
first
is.
person.
The
I mean, I've
language
read
is,
it.
Yeah,
So
but the language
I'm
is
not-
biblical. We can look at eyewitness accounts. We have, for example, Lucian of Samosata wrote an account of him encountering a new religion in what's now Turkey. And it's called Alexander the Quack Prophet. You could probably find examples of it online, but that's what an eyewitness account looks like. The Gospels aren't written like that at all. If you look at Caesar's Civil War, he writes it in third person, but it's still an eyewitness account. And again, it's written very differently than what we see in the Gospels. The Gospels look a lot like mythology. We have a lot of examples of other religions that were coming up with documents that are written in the same kind of voice. And there were, in fact, about 40 different Gospels, and we know about 10 to 12 of them that we have mostly intact or largely intact. And we know a lot of those have to be false, and yet they read a lot like the Gospels we have in the New Testament. So it was actually very common to fabricate narratives in the form that we see in the Gospels in the New Testament.
But I know from personally reading the Gospels that it sounds like a first-person account.
Oh, well, see, I think what you need to do is you got to understand these books were written 2,000 years ago in a different language in a different culture. So if you want to understand
So it was
that,
closer in time. It was written closer in time.
no, but
That
my
counts
point
for
is
something.
you have to look at what literature was like back then. So you can't judge it based on the standards of what you're used to reading today, because what people write today is very different. The styles they write, the way they choose words, the way they construct stories is entirely different today than it was 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, and to circle back to your original question about how reliable personal experience is, I mean, you're telling us that you have this personal experience of having read the Gospels and just knowing by reading it, like knowing and inherently understanding what's going on in there, even though there is this whole system of historians having read it and compared notes and
But I don't need
comparing
a
it to things
historian
that they
to
already
tell me
know.
whether something is written as a first-person account or not. I mean, I can judge that for myself.
Well,
I can read it, and I could be like, this sounds like a third person.
I'll give you an example.
Sounds like an omniscient point of view. This sounds like a first person. Like, I can make that judgment myself.
But they aren't, actually. They aren't even written in first person by standard literary theory. So here's the Gospel of Mark, chapter 15, verse 24. It reads literally, "They part his garments among them, casting lots upon them." Now here's Psalm 22, verse 18. "They part my garments among them and cast lots upon them." It's almost identical
a lot of the
word for
Psalms are
word.
supposed to be like prophecy.
Yeah,
And
but
so if it were
Mark,
true,
Mark is writing in the third person. The Psalms are writing in the first person. The Psalms were written hundreds of years before.
Prophecy and then it was experienced. Then
No, but
would,
see, that's the thing. You could say that, but they're using the exact word for word, exact same statement, and it doesn't even say it's a fulfilled prophecy.
To get back to the point, more what I was really asking a question.
But it's third person. It's
not
not first person.
arguing the point. The
It says
question,
they part his
because
garments among them.
I've watched a couple of your shows, and people will call and they'll be like, my mom said she saw a demon in her room, or my friend, and then a lot of times the first response is,
I would say I wasn't there. I don't have your experience, and I can't tell whether that really happened or not. But you said that this sort of thing goes on in courts, and I can guarantee you that if somebody came in as a witness in court and said, and then I saw a demon rise up out of the earth, it's really unlikely that the judge or jury would take that into account as a serious explanation for, let's say, a murder trial or embezzlement, where
but
somebody
the
said suddenly
value-
this
but-
demon made all
but the
this money
value- but the
disappear
value
from
of them
the company's
saying it-
account.
But the value of the experience for it to be judged by the fact finder, whether it's a jury or a judge, the value of the person saying it and then the listeners interpreting it is primary.
Right.
Okay,
That
but
a
You
yeah,
really sound like
person-
Chris. Really sounds like he's got something to say.
yeah, I want
right.
to jump in here. Yeah, I mean, you talk about eyewitness testimony being so reliable, and it's the ultimate, piece of evidence in our court system, and that's just not true at all. If you look at the reliability of eyewitness testimony, it is terrible. If you put a room full of people and you show them something and then ask them what they saw, you'll get many different answers. And people have been convicted wrongly based on people who were sure this is who they saw, and they were wrong. And it's very, very easy to fool yourself, to think you saw something. If you don't remember clearly, your brain will just make up stuff to fill in the gaps. And we've demonstrated that thousands of times in different studies. So eyewitness testimony is actually really, really unreliable.
One of the leading researchers on that.
It's true what you're saying about, you put people in a room and then it's like, was the guy wearing a tie? And 3 of them say yes and 2 of them say no. But we still hold that as meaningful.
Well, we shouldn't.
Chris was just saying we don't.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's,
not
we
really.
don't, and that would be a bad thing for everybody. So we shouldn't do that.
Yeah, you have
Well,
to wait.
I don't know. I mean, I'm an attorney, and I've taken a really unconventional route. I took my studies extremely seriously, looking at the purpose of the system and the procedure that we've established. People from all different backgrounds coming together and deciding like this is what we're going to do. This has meaning and this is useful. Despite the errors, this is the most fair way we can assess what's going on, and we still have witnesses. We still take in witness accounts, and we still say all relevant witnesses can be replaced.
Witnesses can lie, witnesses can be deceived, witnesses can misreport badly. I mean, you must know this if you've been in courts. Certainly if you're a defense attorney, you must have actually used these arguments that I'm using myself in defense of your client.
Well, the thing is that sometimes that they are telling the truth. And
Sometimes,
it's
it's probability,
The thing that's primary is for the witness
But I
to say what they're thinking, for the fact finder to be like, well, I think your mom was lying.
Yeah, but it
I
certainly
think you're lying,
depends. It
so
certainly
even.
depends at least as much on the nature of the testimony as the content of the testimony itself. I mean, if you, if today you were to have somebody walk into court and say, "I saw this guy die, and 3 days later rise from the dead," or "I saw a ghost show up in my house," that would be one of the least likely things that you were going to accept in court as relevant to the case. I would think.
Well, it depends on what the case was about, whether it would be relevant.
Really?
I don't think so, actually.
Wow.
Actually, by Supreme
mean,
Court,
relevant-
ruling, spectral evidence is not allowed.
Yeah, by
We don't know
16th
what-
century ruling. I
We
think.
don't know what's trying to be proved. I mean, it would depend on what kind of case it was. I mean, you're talking about a drug case where someone killed someone else, and
Yeah.
they're saying what they experienced, and that's why they killed that person. And it's like, was it intentional? Was it not intentional?
Are they lying?
Relevance depends on what's being proved. So, I mean, to my second question, as far as
Okay.
whether things, everything
Oh,
is
the
either
understandable.
understandable
Right.
or it's not.
I can answer
Yeah,
that one because this
well,
is
I
right in
want
my
to,
field.
but you please go ahead. Do we understand more than we did 2,000 years ago?
My PhD's primary subject is history of science. So, and I studied ancient science. So I actually, a lot of what I've done, certainly in my dissertation, was compare what we knew scientifically about the world in the 1st and 2nd century AD with what we know about the world today. And it's mind-bogglingly, vastly more understanding today than we had. I mean, it's just bewildering how much more understanding we have today. So much so that what we've thoroughly established over since the scientific revolution in the 17th century, in just the last few hundred years, we've thoroughly established that the scientific method is so incredibly effective that it can take our understanding of the world and multiply it millions and millions of times. I mean, which it has done so since 1600. So we know, if there's anything we know, is that science works exceedingly well. And the only thing that actually interferes with our advance, that slows it down perhaps, is technological access to the data. A lot of the things, like the questions we can't answer today, we only can't answer because we just don't have the particular machine that can see the thing that we want to look at. Or in particular ways, for example, brain science. To really understand how the brain works, we would need a functional brain scanner that can scan the brain as it works down to the resolution of individual synaptic connections. We just haven't developed that technology yet, but within 50 or 60 years, we may have scanners that can do that. And that's just a technological
and
obstacle.
So the thing that I'm wondering about, so like with that example you just gave, we know that it is understandable, but we're not there yet.
Sure.
What Richard is saying, though, is that there are always more excuse me, I'm going to put you on hold. I need to talk. What Richard is saying is that we never have all the answers, and it certainly isn't going to ever be the case that we're done looking for stuff, because as humans, we like collecting more and more knowledge over time. But to say that because we haven't obtained an infinite amount of knowledge, we therefore have zero knowledge, or exactly the same knowledge as we did 100 years ago, when we lived maybe half as long on average, when we didn't have immediate access to everything that was going on around the globe through like electronic communications, when we didn't have as thorough a knowledge of human reproduction, for example, or people still believed that the sun goes around the Earth, right? To say that we've accumulated all this knowledge and yet we know exactly the same amount as we did 2,000 years ago is just untrue.
But when it comes to God, knowing whether God exists,
well, that's actually a really good point. With all the knowledge that we've been able to gain over all this time, we've learned nothing new about God.
With the brain science example, we are aware that it's understandable, but we don't have the technology yet. But when it comes to the existence of God, we are no further along.
Yeah, to me that's an indication that there's no. Yeah, to me,
looking with a fine-tooth comb and found nothing.
We've been trying as hard as we can, but to me that's an indication.
It may be that God exists, but it's not understandable. Like you can.
Well, let me add to this. If it's not understandable, then Catholicism is false, right?
No,
because
that's the primary premise.
But if you can't understand God, then you can't actually have any true beliefs about God.
That doesn't make sense.
Well,
I mean,
if you have a true belief about God, you're claiming to understand something about God, and therefore God is not.
You don't have to understand something for it to exist.
For you to understand what it is that's true, yeah. If you're going to make any statement that has any meaning that's true about God, that means you understand something about God, and therefore God is understandable.
Well, then we go back to personal experience. Really, this question
we don't think is reliable.
Non sequitur there. But
hey, Jennifer, we're running out of time. Yeah, we're running out of time. But it's a great conversation, and I'd welcome you to call back anytime.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.